morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told, out of Voice of Radio. So today, I am here with potentially good, potentially bad news, depending on where you're actually coming down on this. Because something that has interested me for a while now is the idea of the potential of getting a Zacian VMAX. And I'm here to tell you right now that we are never getting a Zacian VMAX. And if we do, something's gone weird. Also, for the exact same reason, we're never getting a Zacian VMAX. We might mention that later in the video. We might not. Now, Zacian V, if you're following the Pokemon TCG even a little bit, you will know about Zacian V. Zacian V is amazing. Zacian V is brilliant. Zacian V is, frankly, borderline broken. The ability Intrepid Sword lets you look at the top 3 cards of your deck, draw them, but if any of them are Metal Energy, you can attach them. Now it ends your turn, but especially like in the first turn of the game, when you're not allowed to attack anyway? No. Don't worry about it, ladies and gentlemen. Don't worry. Because you're ending your turn by attacking anyway. So you're absolutely fine. Plus 3 energy, 230 damage. And you can't attack next turn, but switch in and out, you'll be fine. And then you got all stuff like Metal Saucer and Turbo Patch to accelerate energy. And most people don't play Turbo Patch, but you never know. Might come into fashion. People tried it for a while. Plus, of course, the ability itself. And then you can play it with ADP. So you do 260 and take an extra prize of every KO, or you play it with Lucario and Melmetal and Metal Goggles, so you take 60 less damage from attacks and you're a tank and all of that. Zacian is amazing. Zacian is so good, in fact, that it's made some people worry, well, what if we ever get a Zacian VMAX? And there is potential reason to worry in that regard. Again, we're not getting a Zacian VMAX, I'll explain in a moment. But back in the Sword and Shield base set, we got Pokemon like Tapu Koko V and Victini V. Now, these came from V-Decks over in Japan, and they made their way into our set, and they were just Pokemon V. But in the most recent Japanese set, what is going to come over here as Battle Styles, we saw Tapu Koko VMAX, and we saw Victini VMAX, which of course has had a bunch of people messaging me going, well, hang on a second, Wassy, are we likely to get other VMAXs? I.e., are we likely to get VMAXs for Pokemon that we've had Vs for a while, and now we get to go ahead and VMAX? Now, for what it's worth, there were a set of 5 V-Decks that were released over in Japan, and essentially, they included the Tapu Koko and Victini, and the other ones were Celebi, Keldeo, and Regirock. So, in terms of VMAXs, we should be expecting that we're fairly sure we will be getting. You should expect at some point in the not too distant future to get a Celebi VMAX, a Keldeo VMAX, and a Regirock VMAX, and I am pumped for Regirock VMAX because I love Regirock V. I was desperate for that deck to be good. It never was, and Regirock VMAX can save it. Maybe they won't, but in Japan, they basically grouped these 5 Pokemon together and listed them as a set of V-Decks. That's what they did. That's what we got. 2 of them, they then randomly turned around and went, hey, they're getting VMAXs now. You've got to know that the card designers know that these were released in V-Decks, and you've got to think that we are, in the not-too-distant future, going to be getting VMAXs of those Pokemon. That is a prediction I'm willing to make, but we can talk more about that later. We should head on back to Zacian. So, Zacian would be very good for Pokemon VMAX, and I've even had a bunch of people asking, well, hang on a second, Wassy, do you think we will get a Zacian VMAX? And the answer is no. And it all goes back to the video game. You see, in the Pokemon Sword and Shield video game, there are 3 Pokemon that are not able to Dynamax. And they are Zacian, Zamazenta, and Eternatus. Now, at this stage, you should probably be kind of yelling at the screen, hang on a second, Wassy, you've just told us we're not getting a Zacian VMAX because Zacian can't Dynamax, and then you're telling us that Eternatus can't Dynamax, but Eternatus has a VMAX. Yes. Quick dramatic pause. The difference is Eternatus has 2 different forms, so essentially what Pokemon went and did was they used the Eternamax Eternatus as the VMAX. Now this isn't really Dynamaxing in the traditional sense, but it's a kind of tangentially related similar thing, so you can understand where they're going. And of course, if you look at the artwork of the cards, Eternatus V is just regular Eternatus, and Eternatus VMAX is Eternamax Eternatus, so it does make sense. Even though Eternatus cannot Dynamax, it makes sense. If we look at all the other Pokemon VMAXs we've seen so far, if they have a Gigantamax form, it's Gigantamax. If not, it's their Dynamax form. So we could look at someone like Snorlax VMAX, for instance. Or we could look at Pikachu VMAX. And what we see is the Gigantamax versions from the game coming through as Pokemon VMAXs in the trading card game. But not all of them have that. So I mentioned Tapu Koko and Victini earlier in the video. Neither Tapu Koko nor Victini actually has a Gigantamax form. So what we see instead here is just Dynamax versions of them. They're big, they're chunky, they've got those weird cloud things swirling around them, as tends to happen. But they are just essentially bigger versions of them normally. There is no form that either Zacian or Zamazenta has that would really lead them to be given a VMAX in the TCG. And Pokemon have been remarkably consistent. Now, weirdly enough, there is kind of a little exception here, and that is that back in Rebel Clash, we saw Cinderace VMAX, Inteleon VMAX, and Rillaboom VMAX. And what do they all have in common? They have Gigantamax forms, but the VMAXs are Dynamax forms. But there's a very, very, very good reason for this. And the reason very simply is, in the Sword and Shield base game, they didn't have them. The Isle of Armor introduced us to the Gigantamax forms of Rillaboom, Cinderace, and Inteleon. And the Isle of Armor, in terms of the trading card game, I mean, the first real thing we got there was your Galarian Slowbro that came around in Darkness Ablaze. So, yeah, that was never going to happen. Incidentally, we know we are getting Gigantamax VMAX versions of both Cinderace and Rillaboom, not Inteleon, weirdly, at the moment, coming out in Japan in March. We know they are coming for a fact. We have been told they are coming for a fact. It's just genuinely a little bit weird that Inteleon is not coming. At least as far as we're aware, it's not coming. And in this regard, Pokemon have been really consistent with the game. Pokemon have been following the game quite closely. And that is essentially why we're never getting a Zacian VMAX. And a Zacian VMAX would be awesome. Because essentially what you would do is you would get a whole bunch of extra HP. You would be able to use the memory capsule tool to still use your 230 attack if you wanted to. But you would essentially just be able to tank so much better. I mean, if you give me a VMAX Zacian, what I'm doing straight off the bat is I'm whacking a metal goggles on there. Unless I'm in Japan, well, that's rotated out. And remember, Japan's format is very, very similar. There are a few select cards I don't have, like Metal Goggles. And I'm using Lucario and Melmetal. And I am attaching a Coating Metal Energy. And I'm having a probably 330, 340 HP Pokemon that's taking 60 less damage from attacks, that doesn't have a weakness. And I'm honestly kind of feeling pretty good about that. But Zacian V is so good. Do we really want Zacian VMAX? I feel extremely confident saying we're never getting it. But even beyond that, does anyone out there actually want Zacian VMAX? Nah, there probably are a few Zacian players that do, aren't there? But no. So the too long didn't read version of it is that because Zacian does not Dynamax in the game, it's not going to get a VMAX version in the TCG, and if it did, it would probably be too good. We've seen a couple of weird exceptions like Alternatives, but I've explained why they are exceptions. Everything I've said, incidentally, holds true for Zamazenta as well, though Zamazenta would lose the ability that stops it being attacked by VMAXs, so there's a decent shout you wouldn't necessarily want to evolve into that anyway. Hey-ho. So that's my thought process on it. This is something that's been really nagging at my mind, and I've had a few people ask me about which VMAXs we'll get in the future, and are we getting ones from older cards getting new VMAXs, like we saw for Victini and Tapu Koko, and I've had a few people even ask specifically about Zacian, so I figured, lazy Saturday afternoon, seems like a nice time to address the question. But now I'd like to hear from you guys, ladies and gentlemen. Do you want a Zacian VMAX, and if we got one, what do you think it would do? Go nuts in the comment section, but be nice. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWasi, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all that good stuff, head on over to patreon.com/PTCGRadio, where you can do exactly that. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.